So the question asked here is, how can we network effectively to learn about companies without feeling like we're taking advantage of the other person if we have nothing to offer in return right now? And I think this is a good question. It's a question about sort of the foundation of networking. But I think if we can shift our idea from networking as a sort of a transactional experience where every party gets something from it that's sort of physical and tangible, and think of it more as a relationship building experience, then we can change this perception or perspective so that it doesn't feel like you're taking advantage of someone. So one way to think about networking is that the people that you are reaching out to at some point in their professional careers have reached out to others, whether those are Penn alumni or other people in their network, to ask similar types of questions, to gather similar types of information that you are looking for right now. So everyone has had an experience where contacts that they've made have been helpful. So as you reach out to someone who is now in a professional role, who's now more secure in their own professional identity, they may be more than happy to share some of the benefit that they got with you, who are, now starting your own professional careers. So the fact that they've done this before and they've benefited from it is going to make it more likely that they understand the nature of networking. The other side of networking is that it's all about helping the person that you are reaching out to understand why you're picking them. So what is it about them in particular, their experience, their knowledge, that is going to be valuable to you? Because if you can identify why this person can answer some of your specific questions and demonstrate to this person that you've done some of the hard work and that you're really going to value what they say, then they're probably going to feel really good about being able to help you, right? And I think one of the secrets of networking is to really focus on making the experience of the person that you're reaching out to as positive as possible. You want them to feel as good as possible about being themselves, about living their lives, because if you can demonstrate that you value them, they're going to feel good about that. And everyone likes to feel valued. And if they feel like they had a positive interaction with you, that you were able to take their advice, that you were able to ask smart questions, then they're going to have a positive association with you. And that's a great way of starting an actual professional relationship with people that you're making a connection with. So just making people feel good about being themselves is something that you are giving them. Making them feel like they're valuable is something that you are actually giving them that is tangible. And everyone likes to be valued. So let's take a look at some of the resources on our website that might be relevant to this question. So here's the Career Services website. We have a section on Learn How To, and networking is a key part of this page. You can get some information about the basics of networking, how you should network, the art of informational interviewing, which is a great thing to be spending your time doing, how to use a tool like Connect and LinkedIn and Career Shift. All of these are resources that you have access to. You can gain a bunch of information here that will be helpful about positioning yourself for success with networking. And I encourage you to take advantage of these resources, including an online Canvas course that we have on networking, can be very helpful to give you that solid foundation moving forward. The Vault Guide has a guide to networking, so you can take a look at that. And you can expand out on these resources to see the other things that are there that you can take advantage of. So do make sure that you are using these resources as much as possible. They're all there for you. They're very beneficial. We have an informational interviewing guide for graduate students and postdocs. This is a great tool, easy to read, very instructional about what you can be doing next with your networking to really gain the most out of the information gathering part of the networking process. LinkedIn is another great tool. What you can do on LinkedIn is go to the University of Pennsylvania school page, like I've done here. Just search for it in the search bar up here, and then on the left-hand side, click on Alumni. This will take you to a nice breakdown of all the alumni and current students who have LinkedIn accounts, so 170,000 today. And there are 6 columns of information that can be very, very helpful here. So you can narrow it down geographically where people are working or living or studying. You can break it down by the organizations that they work at. You can even break it down by their sort of job function. And so consulting is one of these job functions. You can see the 6,000 or so people who list themselves as consultants. You can see now the where they work has changed to represent a whole wide range of consulting roles. If you wanted to narrow it down by people with a background, an academic background similar to yours, then you could certainly do that. That helps you increase the overlap between you and the person that you're reaching out to. So this, for people with a biology background, there's 197 consultants who might be great contacts to reach out to once you've looked at their profiles. And then on LinkedIn, you can sort of start looking at how you overlap with people. Your secondary connections mean that you have someone in common that you might be able to reach out to help you make these connections with people. But certainly there's a lot of information that you can gain just by looking at people's profiles and seeing how their own experience and how their own background position them for the role that they're in right now. This is just another great tool to use to find out and do some research into people before you do your outreach to them.
This question is about resumes. How do I write a one-page business-style resume if I have to include my research, my publications, and business-related work? So this is a good question. A lot of people often struggle with writing a one-page resume for consulting, especially because they have to condense and basically eliminate and omit a lot of different things that they normally would include. So I'm going to talk very briefly about how the research, publications, and business-related work can fit on a resume, especially if it's on one page, and then I'll talk a little bit about the resources that can help you put together a strong resume. So on a one-page resume, what you typically see is contact information up at the top, followed by education, especially for someone who hasn't been in the workforce for very long and who is coming out of graduate school. After education, you typically see an experience section. So sometimes that's divided up into relevant experience followed by additional experience. Other times it could just be one experience section. And then after that, typically it's a skills section that is on the bottom half of the resume. For graduate students who have done research, if it is relevant to consulting, sometimes people would put it under relevant experience. Other people might find that it belongs in the additional experience section. And same goes for the publications. A lot of graduate students will include publications on a CV and will include pretty much all of their publications. But on a resume, if you don't have to publish papers in the role that you're applying for, typically, you're not going to need a publication section, but we would recommend that you include reference to your publications as you describe your research and what you were able to achieve and accomplish with your research. So publications are often presented as the outcomes and the results of your research, right? So even if you don't list them all, you can reference them. So one example would be that you could say that you investigated the XYZ of ABC using X method and Y skills, resulting in 3 peer-reviewed first author publications. So that's like one way to talk about your publications and how they are the results of your work. And then for the business-related aspects of your work, if you've had prior work experience, if you have experience with consulting, that often will go in a relevant experience section. You might even have a consulting experience section if you have consulting experience, right, that you can include. What I want to show you all is that if you go to the Career Services page and you go to the Learn How To tab, you can click on the Prepare Application Materials link, and it will take you to a web page where you can read more about how to write a strong resume. So if you hit this resume writing guide, you can read a little bit more about the purpose of a resume, how to get started with your resume, the anatomy of a resume, and resume samples. You could read a little bit about formatting and layout. And at the very bottom, you can also see some resume samples. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on the master's student resume samples here. And so you can see that there are a bunch. So I've clicked on one of them and it opens up into a PDF. So here's one example of a resume, right? So the contact information usually is at the top, followed by education. This person has their skills in X, which is perfectly fine. They also have a professional experience section where they have bullet points talking about the research that they've done and the other different places that they've been at, right? They also have a project section and then a leadership and a volunteer experience section. So this is just one example of how, one person has shaped their resume. There's also other resources that you can consult as you put together your one-page resume. So if you go to the career services page and go to the top search bar and type in Vault Guide to Resumes, it's going to take you to this resource here. And so if you click on this, if you hit resource, view resource, it's going to take you here to this page. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you just what the table of contents looks like. So if you go down to writing the resume, you could see that there are different parts. Why you need a resume, how do you start a resume from scratch, which can be particularly helpful for those of you who don't have one. You can read about the different types of resumes that they talk about, and there's like a step-by-step guide to writing your resume. So this is a terrific resource as you are putting it together. The other resource that we have is if you go to the career services page again and type in resume basics, it's going to lead you to this YouTube video here. So we talk about resume basics in about 4 minutes for graduate students and postdocs. And this is particularly helpful if you have an academic CV and you're looking to transform it into a resume for an employer. So it's about 4 minutes long, so feel free to check out this resource.
What should an education major learning science and technology do to find a job in the consulting field? This is a very common question that we hear from students who are interested in learning a little bit more about how they can find a job in consulting given their specific academic background. The interesting thing about consulting and many other careers is that many consulting firms are not looking for anyone with one particular background. So perhaps a better question to be asking would be, what kind of skills, background, and experience does a student need to have to make them attractive as a candidate for a consulting firm? I'm going to show you 2 resources on the Career Services website that will be helpful to you in identifying what kinds of skills, background, and experience are important for students interested in a career in consulting. So this is the Career Services website. It is careerservices.upenn.edu. We have different career communities, and there's one devoted to consulting. If you click on consulting, this will take you down to various bits of information that will help you to start to learn what kinds of skills, background, and experience are consulting firms perhaps interested in. A great place to start is right here, the Vault Career Guide to Consulting, which will help to share with you a little bit about what consulting firms might be looking for and what type of a firm you might be a good fit for. There's additional information, articles that are posted both by Career Services staff as well as by outside writers. And at the bottom, lots of career resources that will help to prepare you for interviewing and to learn a little bit more about a consulting firm. Another resource that you might want to check out is alumni. So it would be excellent if you could find a Penn alum who was a student in the program that you're in right now, who is now working into consulting, and they might be able to share with you more about the skills and background that you might bring that would be interesting to a consulting firm. If you click here on Who Are You can click on Masters and PhDs and Postdocs, depending on where you fall. I'm going to click on Masters, and then I'm going to scroll down a little bit until I reach the Networking and Gathering Information section of this website. This is going to give you some information about why networking is important. But the most important resource here is the Career Guide on Informational Interviews for Graduate Students and Postdocs. This resource is specifically designed for graduate students at Penn to learn a little bit about how to network with alumni. This will walk you through the steps of how to identify alumni that you could potentially interact with, ways to approach them, sample emails, and follow-up questions that you're going to want to ask. All of these resources will really help you to identify what kind of skills, background, and experience a consulting firm might value.
The question is, aside from prepping for the case interview, how can I prepare for a career in consulting? What can I read and do to prepare myself for the business world? This is a great question. In addition to having your case interview prep, it is incredibly important to also do your research on what consulting is and understand the industry. Remember, employers are seeking applicants who understand the industry, understand career goals, the skills and knowledge associated with the position, as well as the organization and company to which you are applying. One of the resources we have on our website is called the Vault Guide. It's an incredibly useful resource to help you understand what consulting is as an industry. If you click here from our website to the resource, you will then go to the home page for Vault. Look for the tab that says Vault Guides, and you'll then go over to where it says Consulting. You can then download these guides, which provide information on the firms, as well as consulting in general, in addition to some case interview prep.
Okay, there are sort of three separate questions in this particular question. How do you answer the what is your greatest weakness interview question? How do you answer the what type of leadership would you expect in the workplace question? And then more generally, how do you position yourself on the job market in terms of creating a brand that is meaningful to the people who are interacting with you in terms of recruiters or hiring managers? So let's take the first question first. What is your greatest weakness? This is a very interesting question. When we do mock interviews at Career Services, which is something that you can schedule through Handshake, I often ask the two questions that are very similar to this, right? So what is your greatest strength and what is your greatest weakness? When I ask the what is your greatest strength question, the response is usually something along the lines of, well, I guess my greatest strength is, and so on and so on. And it doesn't feel very sort of engaging and satisfying, right? People have a hard time owning up to their strengths. When I ask the greatest weakness question, more often than not, people respond by saying, well, one of my weaknesses is this, but I also can't do that, and I'm not very good at this, and I've never done this. And on they go, sort of talking about all the things that they can do, or they can't do well, or they think they can't do well. So it's very interesting that people are much more comfortable talking about their weaknesses than their strengths. In terms of answering this question in an actual interview, my recommendation is to actually answer a slightly different type of question. So rather than what is your greatest weakness, you can answer what was your greatest weakness. And that means that you can create a nice story arc about how you identified your weakness, how you've been working on it, and give it a good example of how it's no longer a weakness. Because I think one of the less effective approaches you can take is to say, well, one of my weaknesses is that I have trouble building relationships, but it's something that I'm working on right now. Because that something that I'm working on right now statement isn't very convincing, right? If it's not something you've addressed, then it's probably still going to be an issue in your next work. So if you take the question, what was your greatest weakness? One of the recommendations I have is to start off by saying, at the beginning of my academic program, at the beginning of my PhD, for example, I got great feedback from my advisor that I often tried to take on too many projects at the same time. And I really took that feedback to heart because I wanted to make sure that I could manage the workload in front of me. So what I did was I created a priority list of goals that I wanted to achieve. And I took a look at how I could ensure that I was meeting the deadlines for all the different projects that I have in front of me. So I still take on a lot of projects, but I have this nice system now in place where I can address that. For example, I've been wrapping up my thesis right now, but I'm also the senior, executive leader of a student group, and I've done outreach in the community. And whilst I'm doing all these things, I'm actually able to maintain all of my schedules and my deadlines. And I've really enjoyed having lots on my plate at the same time. And so that's sort of an example of how you can take a weakness, you can identify it, you can own it, but you can show how you've been working on it moving forward. In terms of the type of leadership that you would expect in the workplace, I think the best approach here is to be very authentic, because there's no point in just trying to give an answer in terms of what you think that they're looking for. You're much better off by saying, in my experiences, the leadership that's really helped me the most has been this. And then to give an example of what that looks like. So for example, my current advisor is really great at giving me pointers, but letting me have independence moving forward. And I've really enjoyed that perspective and really valued that. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't value other types of leadership, but what you're doing is highlighting how you have flourished under the leadership in front of you. So I think that's the best approach to take here, where you're really just giving a nice example of different leadership experiences that you've been on the receiving end of, and talk about how in each case you have flourished or valued that type of leadership. And then finally, how do you position yourselves in the job market? Well, the self-branding approach really is based on the research that you do into the fields that you're interested in. So if you're interested in consulting, the more you speak to people in consulting roles about their experience, about the work that they do, about the skills that they use, the more that you can take on some of their language to describe your own version of your professional identity, your own narratives about who you are. So this is really a networking answer, and we've answered a couple of networking questions as part of this video. So I encourage you to take a look there to see how to reach out to people in roles that are similar to the ones that you want, in organizations that are similar to the ones that you're interested in, and learn about how they, as professionals in the field, talk about themselves. Look at their LinkedIn profile, look at their photos that they've used. They're not all perfect, no one's perfect, but they give you an idea about how people talk about themselves in the setting that you hope to be in. So that self-branding really is about taking ownership of the things that you do well, taking ownership of the skills, taking ownership of your accomplishments, being able to create a narrative that weaves those all together in a way that's relevant to the role that you're applying to. So the more you know about consulting, the more you're able to then to create a narrative that works. Now, we do have a couple of resources on our website that I can point you towards. Let me skip over there now. So here is the Career Services website. I'm going to go first to Learn How To, where we'll see that we have a section on interviewing right here. You can take a look at some of the information that we presented on this site. We have an online Canvas course on interviewing, a couple of interviewing guides you can take a look at, some great blog posts related to interviewing, which will be great to focus on, and then a whole bunch of career resources at the end that you can expand on here and see the types of things that we have, a case interviewing guide, our interview stream platform allowing you to do practice mock interviews from the comfort of your own home, where we all are right now. And you can see other types of resources related to interviewing here. There's one other resource that I can point you towards. This is the Carpe Careers blog on the Inside Higher Ed website. This is written by PhD career advisors for the PhD postdoc population, but is applicable to graduate students as a whole. Here's one of the posts that I wrote about how to sort of present your strengths in an optimal way, to focus on the things that you bring, the value that you have, as opposed to over-fixating on your weaknesses. If you go to the Carpe Careers list of all the posts that we have, there's a whole bunch of posts here that you'll find valuable, that you might find resonate with the idea of presenting your strengths in this way. So take a look at that.
The question we have here is, how do I conduct informational interviews, and what should I be getting out of them? How do I maintain the connection afterward? Can I contact people on LinkedIn or alumni that I have no personal connection to? So these are all really good questions. So let's start at the very beginning and talk about what informational interviews are. They are essentially one-on-one networking conversations that you have with professionals in the career field that you're interested in. And the point of these conversations is for you to learn and gather information about a particular career field by talking to someone who's actually doing that work. So you could be asking questions about the organizations they've worked at, the types of roles they've had. You could ask about what they enjoy the most about their work, what challenges they find to be interesting and rewarding. So those are some of the questions that you can ask in this one-on-one conversation. So one of the resources that we have at Career Services is an informational interview guide. So if you visit the Career Services webpage and you go to the Learn How To tab, you can select Make Connections and Network, and you can see a lot of resources that we have here talking about what networking is, who you should be speaking with, when you should network. And down at the bottom, you'll see some resources, some career resources on networking. And what I want to point you all to is if you hit the View All button, you'll be able to find our informational interview guide on the second page. So if you click here, you hit View Resource, it's going to take you to this career guide for graduate students and postdocs on informational interviews. So in this guide, we address a lot of the basics of what informational interviews are. There's also a sample outreach email that you can take a look, especially as you are beginning to contact people to have these informational interviews. So given the times that we live in right now, where where people are mostly staying at home. Informational interviews can be in person, they can be by phone, and they can be by video. So, since a lot of people are at home right now, asking to chat with people by phone and by video is perfectly appropriate. And so there is a sample message here that you can take a look at as you reach out. The second part of that first question is, what should I be getting out of them? I mentioned earlier, you can be asking questions that relate to roles, organizations, tasks, things basically that you cannot find just by Googling and reading things online about certain career paths. One thing that I will mention is that, a lot of people in our appointments like to think that, an informational interview is not successful if it means that that person didn't then lead to me getting a job, right, at that organization. And so I want to make sure that you kind of take a longer term approach to networking and informational interviews. One of the things that we always tell people is to not ask for a job when they do informational interviews. I always say that if you're able to talk to someone and you learn something that you didn't know before about a particular career path, about an organization, about a role, then that is a successful informational interview. Building relationships by doing informational interviews take time, right? Having one conversation doesn't mean that that person will then be in a position to hire you or to give you a referral for a job. So be sure to keep that in mind. So the second part of the question is, how do I maintain connections afterward with someone, right? After you've had an informational interview with them. And so we have a section here on following up. So here's some sample questions that you can ask as you do your informational interview. So after the interview, what you want to do is follow up. We always recommend that you write a thank you note. So you can send it by email. You can send a handwritten card if you have the time for it. And if you have the address as well. And we always recommend that people connect with the person that you spoke with on LinkedIn. And once you are on LinkedIn and you see that connection, post a blog or post an article or comment on something, you can feel free to like their post. It's a way for you to stay in touch with them. If you make a comment, if you notice that they maybe had a promotion and you wrote congratulations, right? That's another way to stay in touch. If you read an article that reminded you of that conversation that you had, you can send that along and just say that, reading this made you think of what you talked about, right, in your conversation. You can always send an update on your end. So if you have something that is worth, reporting on. So if you, let's say, completed a degree, or if you completed an internship or completed a project, it's a good excuse to get back in touch with someone, whether it's a couple months or maybe a year or two after speaking with someone. It's perfectly fine to send an update, and it's okay to also check in occasionally as a way to keep in touch, right? So sometimes you might write an email to ask them how they're doing. They may not write back, and that's okay because they're busy people. It puts you on their radar, right? Seeing your name and your message in their inbox, and that's perfectly fine. So that last question is, can you contact someone on LinkedIn or an alum that you have no personal connection to? And the answer is yes, definitely. We always tell people to network with people whom you know, and to ask those people for introductions to other people that you might benefit from speaking with. After that, it's always helpful to talk to people that you don't know, because that's going to be one of the ways that you grow your network. So definitely recommend reaching out to alums, and be sure in your message, right, to point out what you have in common. So if you've graduated from the same PhD program, if you went to Penn, those are all things that you can mention in your message as you try to compose a convincing message that will get them to reply to you. I'm also going to show you all QuakerNet. So if you go to quakernet.alumni.upenn.edu, you can log in with your Penn key and get to QuakerNet. One of the things that we tell people is to contact alums or anybody that you find on LinkedIn that you want to speak with is to connect with them over email, to send them a message via email as opposed to LinkedIn, because a lot of people don't check their LinkedIn messages because they might not be looking for a job, and so they might not be checking their LinkedIn very often. So we recommend sending an email, and if you pop in an alum's name in QuakerNet, most of the time you will be able to find an email. So that would be a great way for you to connect with alums. And again, it is perfectly fine, and it's normal to be reaching out to people that you don't know to ask for informational interviews.
Okay, in this question we were asked, I'm a life science graduate student looking to enter a career in biotech management leadership in the future. I decided that a career start in business can help me land the leadership role I want. How do I decide between a job in investment banking, management consulting, and venture capital to help launch my career? Now, this is a really interesting question, and one of the first steps that I would take in terms of thinking about how your next step will affect your future steps is to think about those people who already have the jobs that you think you want, right? So if you identify your 5-year out or 10-year out position that you would ideally want, find other people in your network, through the Penn Alumni Network, who have that position right now, and look at the steps that they took to get there. In fact, do more than just look at the steps, try to reach out to them and have what we call informational interviews with them to identify how the steps that they took help them get to the job that they're in right now. So that will be one way of really thinking about what steps you might take, knowing that there's no single path to any of the roles that you're interested in, that people's own career paths have been very dynamic in terms of moving between different types of opportunities to get there. So you can't chart just a single course, but you can figure out some of the steps that people took and then understand better how they were helpful by having conversations with them. So that's really a networking approach to answering some of these questions. But if you think about these different fields, investment banking, management consulting, venture capital, they are all rather different. They have different organizations involved. There are different types of skills that are important in these roles. There are different types of organizational cultures related to these roles. There are different types of work-life balance associated with some of these roles. So it is actually important to do some career exploration into what these different types of industries feel like, into what they value in terms of skill sets, because it may not be a question of which one of these three can I pick. It may be more about which one of these is the best fit for your skills, your interests, and your values moving forward, because certainly those are an important part of the equation. So I'll show you in a second just a couple of the resources on our website that you can use to begin to do some of that background research into these different career fields. Eventually, though, the employers, as you're applying for these roles, will want you to have a demonstrated interest in some of these areas. Your involvement in the Penn Graduate Consulting Club is a demonstrated interest in management consulting. In terms of investment banking and venture capital, what can you point at in your own experiences, on your own resume, that might suggest to an employer that you're more than just interested in these roles, but that you've done something related to those roles? And so the demonstrated interest is what you can be doing as part of your student group activity, as part of the courses that you're taking, as part of the networking that you're doing. These are all going to be very important aspects of how you want to position yourself for these roles. So all of these things are important. The looking at other people's career paths, the exploring the industries as a whole to make sure that they're a good fit for you, but also thinking about how you can demonstrate an interest in these fields to a future employer. Let me share some of the resources that we have on our website that might be helpful as you're doing some of this exploration. Okay, here's the Career Services website again, and what we're going to do right now is look under the Communities tab at our industry communities. So for example, if you're interested in consulting, we can click right here. This is where we gather together some information about this field in terms of general guides, how to prepare for case interviews. We have some articles related to consulting, including networking for consulting, obviously a very relevant article to our conversations right now. And then we have our resources page, including some of the resources that are very specific, things like management consulted as a resource, which is great. If we open up the resources and look at some of these other resources that we have out there, on page 2, we have some of the Vault guides to management consulting strategy, Vault guide to consulting jobs. All of these are going to be very helpful to give you sort of foundational knowledge to help you make sure that you're asking the right questions when you're reaching out to people in your network. If you're interested in finance, we have another finance industry community here. You can see down in the resources a whole selection of vault guides into private equity, venture capital, wealth management, things that you may have a general understanding of, but may be looking for a more detailed understanding before you start asking questions that are out there. So do take advantage of these resources. It will be very helpful to you. For the PhDs and postdocs who may be interested in exploring these different fields, we have another platform that we can look at. It's called the Versatile PhD, and it's helpful to be able to explore some of the career fields related to roles that PhDs have taken beyond faculty roles. So search for it in the toolbar like I just did. Click on Versatile PhD here. This will then take you to our online subscriptions page. So we subscribe to this tool so that you have full access to it. When you get to the online subscriptions page, just scroll down to the bottom. You'll see the Versatile PhD here. And then you can set up your free account through this system and it will associate you with Penn. And once you've logged on to the Versatile PhD, take a look for the PhD Career Finder tool, discovering interesting career paths here, broken down into paths taken by people in STEM fields and the humanities side and social sciences side. And you can see here that you can click on consulting or finance. We can click on these industries. There's some general information about what these fields are, but there's also more specific information. So in this case, stories provided by PhDs who explore their own path to get to this role. Online Q&As that have been archived that you can take a look at. Even the application materials of people who are applying for these roles. So again, that's finance. Consulting has a whole set of other information that you can take a look at. And these will be helpful to you just to get some background information so that you can be much more informed when you're reaching out to people in your network. So make sure that you take advantage of these tools, especially because we do subscribe to them for your benefit, and you can get some great insight into which of these paths may be the best fit for where you want to see yourself in the future.
Question is, how can we grow and maintain our professional network, especially when we want to start a career that is outside of our current field? This is a great question. Many students, in fact, are interested in pursuing a career in a different field than what they studied. Consulting is a popular example. Chances are you probably may not know people who work as consultants, and that's okay. Connecting with people you already do know is a good first step. These can be friends, peers, classmates, faculty, advisors, and previous managers. Ask them if they know anyone in that particular field, and if so, would they be willing to facilitate an introduction for you? That can lead to having an informational interview with them. You can also network at career fairs with employers and at company information sessions on campus. In addition, you can connect with individuals working as consultants through the Penn alumni community, as well as the alumni community from your undergraduate institution. Informational interviews and networking are a great way to establish connections, learn about a career field, the individual's career path, and also share information about yourself. We have a comprehensive resource available to you on our Career Services website. So here's our landing page for PhDs and postdocs on our website. So if you go to careerservices.upenn.edu, you will then find a tab that says, Who are you? Click on PhDs and postdocs, and you'll arrive here. If you scroll down to the section that talks about network and gather information, click on the photo, and this will take you to the overview page of what networking is, why it's important, who you should be speaking with, where and when you can network. And if you scroll further down, you will then see the link to our informational interviews guide. Here you will find an overview of what informational interviews are, what they entail. We also provide a sample outreach email, as well as good questions to ask. How do you follow up after an informational interview has happened? And what are the common mistakes to avoid? The final section of the guide relates to action steps and the checklist that you can have both pre-informational interview as well as post-informational interview. And finally, we offer a sample spreadsheet that shows how you can keep your notes and summaries organized after you conduct your informational interviews. CareerShift is a platform that has not only current job opportunities, but also access to an online contact database for individuals at companies. So if you click on View Resource, it will then take you to the online subscriptions page. You then click on Career Shift. And then after you authenticate using your pen key, you will then arrive at the home page for Career Shift. And then you want to make sure that you sign up for your own free account through Career Shift.
Here's a great question. During the FIT interview, how should I be framing my answers? I don't want to sound like I'm complaining if I describe a problem, and I don't want to sound like I'm bragging if I describe how I solved it. How much detail should I go into, and what should I be emphasizing? The first round interview for most consulting firms is often referred to as the FIT interview. During this interview, a consulting firm is trying to get an assessment as to whether you have the types of skills, background, and experience that would lend itself well to consulting. Often the way that they are asking questions are what we refer to as behavioral interviews. And they're not necessarily concerned with the actual situation that you're describing, but they're more interested in figuring out how you reacted to a particular situation. How did you solve a problem, for instance? So there's a couple great resources that we have on the Career Services website that I think would be helpful as you're preparing for a FIT interview. So if you visit our website, you can click, which is careerservices.upenn.edu, you can click on Learn How to Interview. If you click on this, there will be a variety of resources that I think you would find helpful. The first place that I would start is our online Canvas course on interviewing. This is available to all Penn students who log into Canvas with their Penn key, and you can complete the online course to help you get started on how you would approach interviewing. If you go down further, there are some featured articles as well as career resources related to interviewing, and there are two particular resources that I think you would find to be the most helpful. The first is our behavioral interview prep sheet. This will give you some information about what types of questions might be out there and how you can think about framing your own experience to best answer these questions. You might also want to check out our sample behavioral interview questions. This has hundreds of different interview questions that you might be asked in a FIT interview and gives you a way that you can approach answering them, which we refer to here as the STAR method: situation, target, action, results. So when you're thinking about how you're discussing a problem, again, you're thinking about how you solved the problem and you want to present your answer using the STAR method. It's important to recognize that all workplaces have challenges and problems. So by describing it, you're not complaining about it so much as describing the situation that was there. Really, the best resource that you can do to get ready for FIT interviews is a mock interview. There are several ways that you can conduct a mock interview. You go to our website and you search for Interview Stream. You can log on using your Penn key to Interview Stream. Interview Stream is a great way for you to conduct interviews using a webcam. You can pre-select the questions that you want to be asked if you have specific questions that you'd like to be asked. You can also just indicate what type of questions. You might just indicate behavioral questions that you'd like to be asked. This is a great way to get started. But really, the best way to do a mock interview is to log on to Handshake, schedule an appointment with a career advisor, and we would be happy to meet with you to conduct a mock interview over video chat or in person once the university reopens.
Okay, our next question is, how do I stand out at information sessions hosted by consulting firms, and how do I network with the consultant afterwards? Now, this is an interesting question, obviously, because our environment has changed somewhat, and for the foreseeable future, most information sessions offered by employers will be virtual in nature, which means that they're even less personal, and it's harder to sort of make an impression on the people who might be there. But there are a couple of things that you can do, and one of those things, obviously, to begin with, is to be as informed as possible about the organization and about their projects before you even attend an information session. So once you see a virtual session offered by an organization, make sure you've done some of that background research. During the session itself, I highly recommend making sure that you use whatever feature is available in terms of asking a question or using the chat function to make sure that you do say something, to make sure that you do ask a smart question. And one of the benefits of asking a question during the session is not only do you get an answer that's going to be helpful to you, but then you have an opportunity and potentially an excuse to follow up afterwards, reaching out to the person who answered that question by saying, hey, thank you so much for answering my question during the information session. I was the person who asked about X and Y. I thought your answer was really great because it helped me to do 1, 2, and 3, right? So now you've established the beginnings of a relationship with this person because they answered a question that you asked and you're thanking them for that. So it gives you an excuse to reach out afterwards with a thank you email, and it helps them to remember you as someone who was proactive and asked a question about that. So that's one approach that you can certainly take. In terms of following up with consultants or recruiters after an information session, another approach is to take a look to see if there are Penn alumni who have been recently hired at these organizations. Because especially from a recruiter perspective, the chances are high that a new hire has worked with a recruiter at some point during that process. And so they probably are aware of the recruiter. They may have a connection with that recruiter, and the recruiter may even know and remember who they are. And you can reach out to a recruiter and say, I was recently chatting with a new hire at your organization who recommended that I reach out to you. And that sort of helps ease you into the conversation, shows that you're being proactive and engaging, and that you're sort of taking steps to get closer to that person that are professional in nature. So I would say it's all about doing the research ahead of time and then leveraging the connections that you might have through a tool like LinkedIn.